everyone and welcome. Welcome to the next instalment of the Third Sector Focus Month here at Aspen. We thought it would be useful for all the charities out there to maybe hear from one of the funders. So we're very lucky to have Joanna McCreadie from the Gannochy Trust, who very generously gave up some of her time to do a short input for us in a video, really just kind of talking about what it's like to be a funder, some of the work that the Gannochy Trust do and fund, and some top tips on there as well for when approaching funders in the future, which hopefully will come in very useful. Joanna's been in the role for about a year or so she's quite new into the whole funding landscape herself, so we thought it would just be really useful to have a bit of an insight from her as the Chief Exec of the Gannochy Trust. Hope you enjoy it.
Well, the Gannochy Trust is a pretty unique organisation. We are a registered charity, and traditionally we've very much been part of the fabric of Perth and Kinross. And we do three main areas of work. The first one of them is housing, where we've got around about 300 affordable houses that we rent out. The second one is our estate, so we have farms, woodlands and a cricket pavilion and cricket grounds. And lastly, what we're best known for is our grant making, and we give about £5 million worth of grants per year. So that gives me a really interesting role across all of those different areas. I'm working with so many different people and so many different organisations in a lot of different ways. Trust was originally founded in 1937 by A.K. Bell. And A.K. Bell was a pretty special man of his time. He was a real genuine visionary. He was somebody that looked at the world around him and said, oh, that actually isn't good enough, I'm going to do something about that, I'm going to take action. So one of the things he really cared about was the people that worked for him at Bell's Whisky Company and his city, Perth City. So he saw that there was a real issue around the housing and the conditions that people lived in, so he decided he would build an estate of exemplar model houses, and we still own those houses today, and we still rent them out as affordable housing for people in Perth and Kinross. So really quite an incredible thing to do back in the 1920s and 30s. So what we try and do at the Trust is think about A.K. Bell and his original vision and how we can actually bring that to life in Perth and Kinross and beyond as well, because we provide funding to the rest of Scotland. That's not necessarily a very easy thing to do, because if you think about how the world was in 1937 when A.K. Bell wrote the trust deed, it's a very different time, place and culture to what we live in now. So there is a challenge for us in trying to translate that into the reality of 2021 and beyond. But the Trust over the years has had huge impact in Perth and Kinross in particular. So you just have to look around Perth and you can see the difference the Trust has made. You can look at Horsecross and think about the funding that the Trust gave in order to create that building and create the auditorium there. The library in Perth City is named after A.K. Bell. Most people I speak to in Perth and Kinross have some kind of connection to the Trust. They're aware of its work and its impact. And some of our trustees also, that's part of their commitment to the Trust. They've got that interest in making a difference locally to local people and communities. So that gives us a real opportunity to work with people that are really making a difference within Perth and Kinross, and to work with the council as well, so that we can work in partnership to really create good impact and good positive impact for people and in the areas that A.K. Bell cared about. So the kind of impact that we can achieve through that is really, for the most part, in grant making, it's about enabling others. It's about providing funding in the right way that helps them to do great work and really have an impact for people, place, communities. So one example of that would be the funding we provide to our partners that work in sports, and particularly around cricket. And there we're providing funding that lets all sorts of different groups really participate in cricket, enjoy it, still bring to life that passion that A.K. Bell had for cricket, because that was one of his absolute favourite things to do in life. But actually what we're doing is we're improving people's lives because they're getting access to opportunities they wouldn't get otherwise. So it's really great to see that kind of impact being achieved on a small level as well as on the bigger projects. So, for example, we give capital funding, and that's been used for really impactful, large-scale projects locally. One of the most recent of those has been the support we've given to YMCA Tayside, which is about building and creating a new youth centre in Perth City, which will have an impact for years and years to come for young people living in the city and around there. An impact, I think, is the thing that we're most interested in as a funder. We want to see that the money and funds and resources and support we're able to give actually really makes a difference to people. It really does improve lives. And certainly since I've been in post over almost a year now, I've really seen the difference that we can make, and really how much that's valued by people, particularly in Perth and Kinross, is great to see. You know, in a way, the pandemic, it's almost like, what haven't we done differently over the last year, rather than how's it shifted us? Because actually, the Trust, we've had to do almost everything that we're responsible for in different ways in order to cope with the limitations of the pandemic. You know, so for example, we were building a new houses on our estate when the pandemic arrived and the restrictions got put into place. So what happened is all the building work had to stop, and the completion of the houses were delayed, and people couldn't move into the houses at the time that they expected. So that had a huge impact. And the big challenge for us has been, as it has been for every single other charity in Scotland, is how do you adapt to that? You know, when your normal way of working suddenly gets completely changed, and it felt like, I think, almost overnight for the staff team. What do you do to make everything still run and do it as well as you can, and keep adapting and keep supporting charities through grant making? So I actually started in the role after the first lockdown. So I arrived as a lockdown CEO, I believe we're being called, us CEOs that started during the pandemic. There's a few of us wandering about now. So in some ways, I think it was easier for me because I haven't known a different way of working at the Trust other than doing it virtually and remotely and digitally and from home. But I think one of the key things that we did early on is the trustees recognised the huge impact that the pandemic was having on charities in Perth and Kinross and on the people that they serve, and on how they can actually serve them. So we decided to launch a fund specifically to help charities recover and renew from the pandemic. So that's a £500,000 fund. And that was a very different way of grant making for the Gannochy Trust, because it was very responsive. Charities could put in applications that they got basically a decision on very quickly, and we were able to disburse just over £500,000 to charities in Perth and Kinross for hugely diverse reasons. So we had everything from tackling food poverty to digital adaptation, to memory boxes for people with dementia and Alzheimer's. So a huge range of work taking place on the basis of that, and that was very much a deliberate attempt to really try and support the charities affected and also the communities that we serve together as well. So that was an important part of the adaptation. I think the biggest thing within the Trust, like most charities I'm talking to about the pandemic and how it's affecting them, is just how we've adapted to learn how to use technology and digital, and suddenly we're all comfortable being on Zoom, having meetings, having arguments and debates on Zoom as well sometimes, but also developing our digital capacity in terms of the software that we have, how we communicate and how we work with others as well. So we've very much shifted the mindset into not kind of, oh dear, we'll have to do this digitally, but right, okay, we want to do this. How are we going to do it then, and how can we adapt to what the platforms we've got to work with? So one of the things we did in partnership with PCAVs, who are our local third sector interface in Perth and Kinross, was launch a series of sessions where we actually talked with and listened to what charities had to say about their experience, and we did that all entirely digitally. That would have been pretty much unheard of before the pandemic, for the Gannochy Trust to be doing that, but also actually I think for most of the charities round about us as well. So it's been a real process. It's kind of a sudden shock of having to adapt, and then a real process of truly adapting, of truly absorbing some of that change and that challenge to work differently, and then learning to do it better and gradually improving that skill set over time. So I think what's really interesting about all of that is the question of, well, to what extent can we take all that learning into what we do next? So as restrictions lift, can we take the best parts of that and the things that work and that serve us well and that make us more efficient and keep them? And then can we build back in that human connection that I think we're all missing in whatever we do in our work? Because that's actually a really important part of everything we do, is those relationships and how we connect to people and the organisations and the work they're doing. So that's a great question, because I am absolutely brand new and shiny in terms of grant making. That's what I keep telling myself anyway. Because before I was in this role, I was largely managing services for children and young people and families. So it's very different to step into a funding role and to have the challenge of learning as much as possible about funding, but also particularly working at a funder like the Gannochy Trust, which has such a long history and is so well established within Perth and Kinross and across Scotland. So I think there's some key differences about being a funder and the way that people approach you and how folk relate to you. And I think what happens is there's an anxiety for people when they want to come and have a conversation or have a chat or raise an issue, because people are naturally anxious about the impact of that conversation or discussion. And I think they just worry about, am I making the right impression? Am I saying the right things? Have I got the up-to-date jargon? Am I selling this enough? Is my pitch right? Is this an exciting proposal? Is it innovative? So there's all this I think what happens is, for the charity or the charity leader or whoever it is, there's all this mind reading of the funder that I think is going on before they even get into that space with you and get into any kind of conversation. And I think what's unfortunate about that is it almost creates a barrier to a more genuine engagement and a more genuine conversation. And I think because sometimes people feel, well, I have to be impressive, I have to do things a certain way, it almost turns into a sort of sales pitch of the charity or the work or the particular project. And I think certainly that's quite tricky, and it's particularly tricky for somebody like me because I come from a charity background of running services and actually sitting in front of funders myself and applying for funding myself. So I think that then is I find that quite difficult because it feels like we're actually missing the opportunity to really connect in a really human way, and for myself and the staff at the Trust to really get the understanding of the work that the charity is trying to do. Because that's what we're interested in. We're interested in, well, what are you trying to achieve? What's the impact that you're going to give from that? How well is that all working? We're really interested in all that. We want to hear about it. So if it turns into a pitch of how brilliant we are and how much they're trying to impress us, that gets in the way, essentially. So that would be, I suppose, my key point to any of the charities, any of the sort of charity leaders or fundraisers or whoever you are working in a charity. Don't try and avoid that temptation to mind read and impress the funder. Much more approach it with an authenticity and a genuineness, and really believe in your work. Because I think if you're doing good work, then certainly I'm confident that myself and the team at the Gannochy Trust will see that and understand it, but also have a confidence that my fellow funder colleagues will also see that. And I do know from talking to them that that's exactly what they're most interested in. It's the good work we're interested in. So that takes away the need to be impressive, to do that sales pitch thing. So that for me would be a fundamental thing. I think, on top of that, I think it's always helpful to understand where the other person might be coming from. So look at their funding strategy, look at what they're interested in, what they've funded before, where they're cited, and all of that will give you information that will help you engage and build a relationship with the funder and have a good conversation with them. And I think as you do that, then most funders, I think, are actually interested in developing a relationship over time with the charities they support, because they want to do a good job. They want to do it well. So have a bit of confidence in yourself and what you've got to offer, and bring that into the conversation. So those are the kind, and I think having sat on both sides of the table, obviously on Zoom it's not quite a table, but both sides of the screen. Having sat on both sides of the screen, I think that's what then gives you success in that relationship, if you approach it in that kind of way and make it about the work rather than about the sale. I think that's really key.